So again, this is the week of Vacation Bible School, and we are so excited. Vacation Bible School, we know, has an impact on kids. Most adults who are in the church and remain in the church say that it's one of two things that it really impacted their faith as children, either going to camp or going to Vacation Bible School. And so we're grateful that this week will be impactful in the lives of our kids. And we want them to come knowing that Vacation Bible School is more than just fun. And we even want them to know that Vacation Bible School is more than just about learning. But for years and years, Vacation Bible School has also been about serving. And we've always adopted kind of a mission project so that our kids can tangibly serve in some ways. They bring offering to worship every single day. We have worship every day, and they bring offering to that. And they give offering at the time. And then we also take in-kind donations, which you'll hear about in our ministry ops. And they bring stuff that then gets used and is for the greater purpose. Well, the project, as we reflected on the rainforest, the project that we invite you all and our kids to be part of is Mosaic's work, especially Mosaic in Tanzania. Mosaic has kind of an impact of ministry in Moshi Town, especially the area right around where the area we call home base when we go to see our sister congregations in that same region. And so many of you know of the work of Mosaic. The earliest history of Mosaic is from Axtell, Nebraska in 1916. A pastor, Dahl, started a place called Bethphage, and then we know that other organizations merged. You guys might remember Martin Luther Home in Beatrice, which had a big footprint of ministry there. They all merged into one. But the point of Bethphage and Martin Luther Home was to take care of folks who, in the early 1900s, had no other place. They had no other help. Families with someone who had especially developmental disabilities had no place of support. And so because they were underserved, this ministry got started. And it has grown. Again, when I was in Gage County being a pastor, Martin Luther Home was huge in terms of all that it provided and made a giant impact in that community. Mosaic has greatly increased over the years, and now especially by invitation, supporting internationally, helping folks support the most vulnerable in our society. As a pastor, I'm so grateful that we here at Sheridan work so hard to safeguard our children. Again, we have been a leader in safeguarding God's children, now called Safe Gatherings, and how we make sure that children are protected. And I'm glad that we support ministries that do that same thing all across the world. And Mosaic does that on behalf of us as a serving arm of the church. They do this work for you and for me. And it is so by their great work that we are connected to those people being served. We heard in Psalm 91 that Galen read that God is a great protector and that God is calling us to protect. And the beautiful thing about the way Psalm 91 is written, which is so different than most of the Old Testament, it's very personal. God loves those who he protects and protects out of that love and calls us to do the same thing. And so we need to understand that caring for the most vulnerable is something that is personal, should be personal to us. We should care that much. And oftentimes we don't, which is part of why we have invited Brian Coffey here today to help us to understand this connection. So I'd like to invite Brian forward. Brian Coffey is a senior community relations manager at Mosaic, and he came all the way from Des Moines this weekend to hang out with us and tell us Mosaic's story. So have a seat. Yeah. So again, thanks for being here. Most of the folks, I gave a little bit of a history, but most of the folks in this room from southeast Nebraska knows the work of Mosaic. But again, maybe you can give us a bit of a history of that.
Yes, certainly. Thank you so much, Pastor Greg.
Sure.
And thank you all for having me as well. I'm going to kind of reposition so you can see me over here as well. So Mosaic is 100 plus years old, having combined two organizations in the early 2000s that spent decades serving individuals with intellectual disabilities across Nebraska and beyond. And it's wonderful the work that's been happening over all this time. And Mosaic now serves in 12 states as well as internationally. And all that started with the vision of Pastor Dahl 100 plus years ago, where he recognized the need for individuals with differing abilities, needing services and needing support. And with a vision that he had from God, he reached out to 54 different individuals, all of which supported with $1. And that $1 from each person equated to $54, later spanning off into something that has done incredible work and served thousands and thousands over the last 100 plus years across Nebraska, Iowa, and a total of 12 states and beyond.
Yeah, how many, what kind of services does Mosaic provide?
So here locally in the United States, most of the work that Mosaic is doing is serving adults with intellectual disabilities, oftentimes adults who maybe their parents are no longer able to help care for them, and they might need some supports so that they can continue to live life to the fullest. And so that's what Mosaic is doing here locally in the United States. And then beyond internationally, it looks a little bit different.
Yeah, I regularly talk about it as kind of living with dignity. Yeah. Folks who are differently abled, who might not be able to have the proper care in their home, to be able to go either for respite care or daycare or physical therapy or even live full-time at a place. My experience is that they live with much more dignity and in the love of Christ. Yeah. So talk about how you got to Tanzania.
Certainly. So I work for Mosaic, and we have this wonderful program in Tanzania. It's a partnership. You referenced a little bit ago by invitation. So what Mosaic doesn't do, and it's important for you to understand this, and I try to communicate this to everybody, is that Mosaic doesn't look at the map and take a pin and stick it on the map and say, this is where we're going, and this is the work that we're going to do. That's not the way that Mosaic works with our international partnerships. We end up internationally when there's the need, and it's by invitation, where an organization that is trying to do work to serve people with intellectual disabilities connects with us and says, hey, we would like some assistance. And so we go and do the international work by invitation only.
And you don't have a physical presence there. You just train and support, right?
Correct, we don't. So you might see in just a moment, there's a photo at some point. It's got two gates that say BCC on it, and right here it is. And that says building a caring community. And Mosaic does not have a physical presence. We don't send employees to move and live and work there from the United States. We don't even have an office that says Mosaic. We have an organization that is in partnership with us by invitation called BCC. And it's an opportunity for us as Mosaic to financially support, as well as provide knowledge, education, and expertise so that the local community can become educated and better learn how to engage and understand and interact with people who have differing abilities.
Yeah. And we've been talking about being fearless, and again, one of from my perspective, it feels like Tanzania is about in the same place where, in terms of dealing with folks who are differently abled, in the same place where we were in the United States 100 years ago, when Mosaic was founded, that there was lots of stigma and fear and lack of understanding, knowledge, and skill with regard to how to deal with folks who are differently abled. And so, we're just bringing them kind of up to speed, if you will. So can you talk more about how kind of the history of that?
Certainly, that's a good comparison. You guys saw the photo a little bit ago of what it looked like in Nebraska 100 plus years ago for people with differing abilities. And that's where we're at in Tanzania, as well as in so many other places around the world. I spent time in Nicaragua doing some very similar work. And the reality is that so many people don't understand differing abilities. There might be a misunderstanding, or and somebody has told them that this happened to your child because of something that you did earlier in life, and because God cursed you. And the reality is that's not the truth. Correct. The reality is that people just don't understand. They haven't had an opportunity to learn. They haven't been educated, and they just don't know what it looks like and what differing abilities are. And sometimes, Pastor Greg and everybody here, is that sometimes that leads to people doing things to children that might look cruel, but it's also, the reality is that it's because they have the lack of education. So
yeah, like this is I know, having been there myself, this is kind of the second generation where even some children were allowed to live. I mean, it was seen as a scourge on the family. And part of that was because of Christian evangelization, that families were, there's that famous story in the Bible, who did what wrong to have this child be compromised. And so, there's just almost like a shame surrounding that. Mm-hmm. And with very limited resources, some families just discarded infants that were, that they knew were going to be a financial or social drag on the family. As cruel as that sounds, that is what happened. And again, it's this progress of work to show that it doesn't have to be that way.
Correct.
And now with skills and with understanding, one of the things that I knew happened when one of my trips to Tanzania was a mother needed to go to the store, and that was a several-hour process, walking miles and then walking back, and had a teenage son who couldn't be left at home alone, and so tied that child to a tree out of, believe it or not, an act of mercy, which sounds really cruel to us, but it actually was an act of mercy because of the dangers of leaving that child alone. And I know you've encountered that kind of thing.
Yeah, so to that point, and it's important to know that is an act of mercy. It's not cruelty. It really comes down to, in so many situations, resources available and education. And so my assumption is that everybody in this room probably has some place to go at night, and very likely has a door on that facility, that home, or wherever you're staying at. Whereas sometimes around the world, in Tanzania, for example, there might be homes that don't have a door.
Absolutely.
And don't have a place for that child to stay safely. And so when a guardian needs to go someplace to work or the store, and for whatever reason they can't take the child who has differing abilities, sometimes the only thing they can do to keep the person safe so they don't wander off is maybe tie him up. And so it's not necessarily a cruel action, it's an action out of safety.
Correct. And again, we don't understand culturally that these towns are small and the wilderness is wild.
Correct.
And it is very unsafe.
Yeah.
And so to be able to have Mosaic go in, teach the local organizations how to provide care, respite care, all of these things that they just had no concept of, has been huge.
Yes. Yeah. Mosaic does provide physical therapy, a location for children and young adults to come throughout the day when the guardians can go to work, providing skills-based learning for young adults, really just a variety of opportunities. Here's a wonderful photo that I took last year of a young adult learning how to sew, and sewing papier-mâché cards that are then distributed. And that one that says Asante Sana, which means thank you very much. So, yeah.
And to show the progress, I think one of the exciting things that I learned from you, Brian, in our conversation is you have a parade now. You've gone from this society of shame around folks who are differently abled to now being celebrated. Yeah,
so the parade is my favorite part. So this you're going to see a few beautiful photos that I took last year, and I try really hard to capture photos of joy and excitement. I don't want to show you photos of just people who, we've seen enough photos, especially in the early 90s and 2000s, of photos of children who are dying. And while that happens, that's not all of what's happening. This is Adam, a wonderful young man. And so the festival day and the parade day, it's a day of advocacy and learning and education and celebration. This is my favorite photo right here. And I took a lot of photos last year. So I want to tell a story, if that's okay. Just a really quick story as well. So something that I didn't realize that was happening last year on the parade and festival day is when we were gathered in the city of Moshi, waiting to parade through the city to get to the festival field, what should have been about a 15-minute wait became a 30-minute wait, and then later became a 45-minute wait, and we were trying to figure out what was going on. And what we discovered is that the person at the BCC office who was supposed to connect with the local police department to schedule our escort through the city, unfortunately forgot to do so. And so what happened was then that individual went to the police department and said, "Hey, where are you coming? Are you coming?" And they said, "Well, we weren't informed." And it wasn't until about 3 or 4 days later on my flight home that I realized what actually happened here. The police department could have very easily said, "We're not going to escort you. We don't have anybody. We don't have the manpower." And they could have easily said that. And at that point, our festival day would have ended. However, all the years of advocacy work that BCC and Mosaic have been doing really paid off. And what happened is the police department then said, "We know the work that you're doing, the advocacy that you've been doing over the last several years in Moshi. We're going to go ahead and come and send an escort." And so then they escorted us so that we could still have our wonderful festival and parade day. And it was just, of all the days that I spent in Tanzania last year, and will continue to do, the parade and festival was by far my most enjoyable day.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Can we thank Brian for coming all this way to be with us here? If you want to talk to him more, he'll be at the table out of the Great Hall.
Thank you.
We hear in Psalm 91 that he will command his angels over the most vulnerable. We are to be those angels to those within arm's reach and those half a world away. We're grateful for Mosaic serving for us in that way, and we're especially grateful that our young people, our children in this week, will learn their role in caring for the most vulnerable. Let's be in prayer.